Hey, it's Brett, and this is Brett and Some Books. Today we are continuing Boxcar Bertha, an autobiography. Please like and share and subscribe. Chapter 2. I was 11 years old when the United States entered the World War. Some of the railroad men got passes for our whole family, and Mother left her boarding house and took us to Little Rock, Arkansas, to a cooperative colony in the hills. A woman hobo who had stayed with Mother in the winter before when she was sick had told us about it, and several of the labor leaders had been there and urged mothers to try it. We found there were 35 families, socialists, anarchists, and freethinkers, all opposed to war, weary of the struggle for existence, blaming capitalism for their difficulties, all wanting economic security and mental peace without too much of an effort. They were living in peace without living in houses and cottages they had built themselves, clustered in a beautiful valley. A group of socialists had purchased the property and invited others to join them there. There was one central lodge where the affairs of the colony were discussed. Those who came with money or earned any while there put it into the common fund. All worked the land. By the time we arrived, there was a well-organized cooperative farm experiment under the way. There were 75 of us, or 71 of us children. We went to a school conducted in an old barn by two remarkable teachers, Bill White and his wife, Edna. They had taught school in the East, but had been forced to leave when the school board discovered that they had never been legally married. They had come to the colony in the hopes of establishing a modern Francisco Ferrer school. We did not get much regular schoolwork, probably, but we did have some reading, writing, arithmetic, and spelling. Mostly we learned about inconsistencies of religion and about government, labor, and economics. We were taught that capitalistic system was wrong and that people were poor because they are exploited and do not get the full product of their labor. We were shown that the government protected the private property of the rich and that the government and violence the rich could not continue. We were taught also in the colony of the dignity of labor and were made to feel the need for preparing ourselves to live in a free cooperative society. The only textbooks I remember we had were William Morris's News from Nowhere, Oscar Wilde's The Soul of Man Under Socialism, Emile Zola's Labor, and Walt Whitman. We had to recite one of Whitman's poems every day. Besides our teachers, two persons in the colony played important parts in my development. One was Edwin C. Owen, then only 19 years old, a sweet young poet, blond with a small mustache, with a voice so rich with his English accent that every word he said sounded like music. He read Byron and Shelley and Strindberg and Ibsen to us, and poems of revolt, among them C.E.W. Wood's The Masters, Makers of the Bloody Revolution, so that even after all these years I remember such lines as, "The end is always packed in the beginning, the apple is in the bud and the worm is in the blossom." He read us Altbacher's Anarchism and attempted to explain Tolstoy and Proudhon and Godwin and Tucker. He would say, "The holding of property is robbery, and marriage is an outlawed institution. My house, my dog, my wife, men make their gods, but gods do not make men." Owen was studying shorthand in the colony and typewriting, and he had me study with him. I'd never been without a typewriter since, when I could help it. Even in jails I have been permitted to use one, and I have constantly practiced shorthand. This has helped me to earn my living many times, but more than that, it has made it possible for me to take down quickly and keep notes of many important things people have said. If you don't judge my grammar or my spelling too severely, I'm a fair stenographer. Another man at the colony who meant a great deal to me was Herman Beginski, a pudgy little fellow with intense eyes and a bulged forehead. This comrade came from Germany, but had worked at his trade as a tailor for over 30 years in New York. He had saved a few $1,000s. He was weary of the city and had come to the colony in order to live simply. He was a believer in free love and was trying to write a book on love. When women learn the technique of love and become economically independent and understand birth control, they will be free, he used to say. Marriage is slavery for a woman. Children are born by accident. While we were at the colony, we lived in a little cottage by ourselves. Mother made our expenses by doing the cooking and washing in the big house where most of the unattached men lived. I have learned since that she took care of some of the sex needs of those men, too. But as I remember it, she was always energetically scrubbing and cooking for them, always gay and friendly, ready to tell or listen to a good story. I remember her reading a great deal, studying books against war, and in groups at night, talking passionately against it. When she was serious, there was not a soul in the colony who would not listen. I remember her face all lit up with feeling when she once told a group of the women that she and they had no right to have more sons to give the land for cannon fodder. My brother and the rest of us children worked 4 hours a day in the colony. One of the rules was that everybody had to do some kind of useful work. Like if a child was old enough to play, he was old enough to do something useful, even if that was only fetching the water from the well or carrying a broom. When we had been at the colony about 11 months, James Wilson, a dark-haired, powerful man of 30, who looked like the New Yorker he was, and who spoke with an Eastern accent, came to stay a week. He was an active anti-militarist. I have a heart lesion, and I would have been excused from military service in any case, he told us. But I am not satisfied because I don't have to go to war, and it doesn't make me happy that I can die quietly in bed. All war is stupid. It is cruel and expensive and outrageous. That which we gain by violence, somebody with more violence will take away from us. When he left the colony, he took Mother with him. Baginski and the other colonists said they would look after us while Mother went crusading through the country. I remember that I didn't have a doubt in my mind about the need of her going or the rightness of her cause. In the time that followed, we children were greatly concerned in the affairs of the colony. The school flourished. The common cause of finding a way to live without exploitation became part of us. Many leaders of various movements came to speak to us. There was talk of expanding the farm by pushing it farther into the hills. There were quarrels over housing and regulations. We all felt that the colony was very important. We were being watched. I remember feeling disgraced when the war fever got hold of a couple of our younger boys and they left to enlist. Now and then, a woman from the outside came to the colony. Some of them hoboed their way in. They were always on some kind of crusade. And after a quick conference with our leaders and an envious glance at our wooded valley, they were off again. These women were older than the women on the road now. They were out with a purpose. I remember 3 particularly, radical women who caused quite a stir because their manner of traveling. They stopped on their way from a conference to maneuver a strike in California. Agnes was from Vassar. Ray was from a group of garment workers. Mamie had a father who was an active socialist in Pittsburgh. All 3 women wore trousers. They didn't have time to ride freights or hitchhike. And from New York to Little Rock, they had decked a Pullman from the fastest passenger train, climbed up on a top while waiting in the station, and after it started sprawling out on their stomachs, bracing themselves with their hands over their sides, with only the little ventilator shutters between their legs to keep them from flying off into space. Their brown, rather harsh and purposeful faces, and their ringing voices as they spoke to our group in the evenings before they took a Ford back to Little Rock to deck another train at midnight, seemed very dramatic then. They risked their lives hoboing. Another woman hobo came walking into camp with a man comrade. She wore men's clothing too, but she dressed up in a red blouse for her talk to the group in the evening. When she was told who we children were, she put her arms around us and said that she had heard Mother in a wonderful speech in Boston, and that we must be brave until her work was over. She waited at the colony 2 days until 2 other comrades came for her in a car, and they went off to a free speech fight in San Antonio. Mother was gone for almost a year. When she returned to the colony, she brought with her a grand young man, an Irish poet, John Carney, who was connected with the Irish labor movement. He was tall, thin, serious, and only 24 years old. Mother had picked him up in Greenwich Village in New York. Although he was 11 years younger than Mother, she had taken him for her man, and in 2 days they were off for Seattle, Washington. We were off with Mother to Seattle, Washington. We started out by a day coach, though we didn't have enough money to make the whole trip. We stopped off for a week in Bismarck, running into Mother's husband, Toby, and having a fine visit with him. He urged Mother to leave the children with him, but she refused. "Whenever you or the children want to come and live with me, the home is still yours," he said. He was very good-natured about it, and learning that we were broke, insisted on buying us tickets to Seattle. Carney urged us to go that way, saying he would be on the same train. He managed this by riding the rods and decking the coaches as far as Butte, Montana. There, as we left, Mother was watching and saw that she could not make it, so she pulled the cord and stopped the train, and we got off. Carney chided her for being so loyal, but she smiled in deprecation. "Well, we started off together and we're going to travel that way," she said. That night, while we were yet in the yards, a railroad detective picked us up and took us to a police station. Mother, who did all the talking, explained that her husband had a job in Seattle if only he could get there. The officer looked at Carney skeptically. "You mean your son, don't you?" he grinned. They kept us in jail all night, but in the morning took us to City Hall and gave us tickets to Seattle. Mother said nothing about having first-class tickets in her pocket all the time. In Seattle, we first went to the IWW hall, and one of the fellow workers showed us to a cozy little apartment on a hill not far from the waterfront. From our window, we could see the tops of the boats going out, and around the corner was all the exciting activity of the harbor. Good living seemed ahead, but in less than a week, Carney was gone. There was a bitter free speech fight going on at San Diego. "Where there is a struggle, that is where I want to be," he told us. "You have nothing to worry about. You are strong, you can work, and if you need any help, the IWW will look after you." We kissed him and goodbye lovingly. The next we heard of him, he had been killed at a labor riot. Mother had a job cooking in a short-order restaurant. She registered as a small student at University of Washington and put us 4 children in school. We had all been irregular and lacked proper credits, but upon examination, we were placed. I started work in Seattle High School. We managed pretty well during the next 2 years. Mother was a good provider. Her work at the restaurant was hard and of long hours, but she came away from it as if it had not touched her and entered upon our own life with gaiety and enthusiasm. In addition to everything else, she'd made our clothes for us, designing them to suit our hair and coloring as well as our figures, and did it so well that I had the feminine satisfaction of seeing other girls in high school envy me for my clothes. But most of the girls in my own age seemed rather silly to me then. School did not matter a great deal anyway. It seemed ridiculous to study Latin grammar when the whole exciting world was waiting outside. About half the time we were located in Seattle, we spent in Home Colony, an anarchist settlement near Tacoma, living about with different families in the group. This was a free love colony, started by a group of anarchists who bought the land and organized vegetable, fish, and chicken raising projects. Each family had its own house. Everyone there made us welcome. We swam and fished, dug clams, worked in the vegetable gardens, helped pack eggs, and all of it seemed play to us. There were a number of fine, sturdy, clean youngsters about my age. We studied hard, and in the summer evenings we sat around a fire near the water, and someone read to us. In this group, I first became acquainted with Shaw, Darwin, Emerson, Huxley, and Lenin. While I was at Home Colony, I met David Kaplan, a fugitive. He had been indicted with Matthew Schmidt and the McNamara brothers for blowing up the Los Angeles Times building. The McNamara brothers had been caught and sent to San Quentin, but Kaplan and Matthew were being sought by the whole country. We took long walks in the woods together, and I asked him if he were not afraid in the colony, since the Burns Agency had offered $5,000 reward for his capture, but he shook his head. If a man is an anarchist, or an honest union man, or labor leader, I don't mind letting him know who I am, he said. I've traveled all around this country, and in England and South Africa. Thousands of my comrades know who and where I am, and not one would think of betraying me. A little later, someone did betray him, however. Donald Voss, son of one of the women in the colony. I remember sitting one day in the doorway of this woman, Gertie Voss, his mother, an ardent freethinker, when she said, in speaking of the rights of women, "A mother has the right to throw her baby in a stove and burn it up if she wants to." When I heard later of her son's betrayal of Kaplan, I regretted that she had not exercised her right. While Mother was attending classes at the university, she met E.A. Orr, an instructor in political economy. He came regularly to the Saturday night group of literary people, radicals, anarchists, and a few professors she had gathered around her. Mother was very much attracted to Orr, and he soon became her lover. She made no effort to hide her feelings. She had never learned how to lie or to deceive anyone, and whenever she had a new lover, she was very enthusiastic about him and took us children into her confidence. When I was 16, the men began to notice me, and I them. When I had gone swimming naked or taken sunbaths in a mixed group, occasionally one of the other boys had attempted to touch my body or make remarks about it. But no one seriously tried to bother me, and I can honestly say that I had never really wanted to come close to any man. I had heard so many discussions and read so much about sex, and had become accustomed to nakedness so naturally that I had no curiosity about it. I often had said that I would never marry, and whenever a lover really wanted me, or I wanted him, I would take him. "Mother, what should I do when some man tells me he wants me?" I asked her once. Her large gray eyes smiled at me as she answered, "Babe, if a man wants you and you want him, just take him. There isn't much to it. I have to do all kinds of loves, and it never did me any harm. Don't be afraid of life and love and nature. Anything you want to do is all right with me. Men can't do you any harm. Nobody can hurt you but yourself. Every experience you have makes you all the more fit for life. Men are wonderful. When you get tired of them or they of you, leave them without bitterness or regret. No matter what happens to you, I'll stand by you. Professor Orr, the young instructor, came often to our house. He stayed late, often all night. He brought us good books and talked to us all as he thought we were intelligent persons. Often he took the whole family riding. But one evening he asked me to go for a ride alone with him. We drove a long way through the hills. Then I stopped and he began to make love to me. I found that I wanted him to go on, and he became my first lover. It never occurred to me that I was showing any disloyalty to Mother in letting him. Later, though, he intimated that possibility. "What do you think your mother will say when she knows?" he asked. "Let's ask her," I answered without hesitation. So we went home and told her about it. For a moment, a strange, drawn look crossed her face. Then she smiled and quietly turned to Orr. "Do you think, then, that you are strong enough for the two of us?" was all she asked of him. EAO never made romantic love to me. "I want you," he would say, or "I need you," or "your body is grand." Our affair lasted for nearly a year. Mother never mentioned it again, but continued her own relationship with him. Even with EAO, Seattle became monotonous to me. It was late spring. I was nearly 17, weighed about 160 pounds, was built, EAO said, like a truck horse, and I was restless. I walked out along the waterfront and the freight yards. I read the ads of the excursions to the east and the south and the north. I remembered women I had seen getting off freight cars, women hitchhiking. Over at IWW Hall, I met a number of women hobos who had been tramping about the country and listened eagerly to their stories. Ina was restless too, and bit by bit we decided that we wanted to take a look at the world and see for ourselves what it was like. Ina was 14, blonde and dainty, very small wrists and ankles, childlike still, yet showing clearly the attractive woman she was about to become. After a few days of planning, I spoke up for both of us. "Ina and I want to go out on the road," I told Mother. "Ina wants to go to school in the East. She has some talent to write and draw. I think the East has more opportunities." Mother put her arms around us both, saying, "I knew you were getting ready to leave me," she said gently. "I want to tell you something before you go. I've always been a roughneck. I've never had any morals, nor did I ever teach you any. But I've been a happy mother. I'm proud of both of you. Remember that I never made any sacrifice for you, nor did I give up any pleasure or good times for you. I never did anything different because I had children, and so don't either of you do anything for me that isn't easy and natural for you to do. I haven't any advice to give you. You both know plenty now. Just remember one thing, however, a woman's character, her value to the world, and her love for man is not in her hips, but with her heart and her head." EAO bought us tickets to the boat from Seattle to San Francisco. A gay little crowd came down to see us off and sang IWW songs and a parody on "We'll Never Say Goodbye in Heaven." Ina and I had a light woolen dresses, new coats. Mother had packed our grip and had given us an extra dress apiece, extra shoes, underwear, stockings, and a few toilet necessities. "That's all you'll need," she said, "and baggage is a nuisance." We moved into San Francisco Bay next morning while the sun was coming up, deep red on the water's edge. I was up and dressed and on deck. My heart throbbed deeply as the ship's engines. I was wildly happy with life and in anticipation of the future. Some of the girls we had known in the colony met our boat at San Francisco and took us to their home. In less than a week, both of us were working, Ina as a children's maid in a home near Presidio, and I as a check girl in a restaurant. True to Mother's teachings, we began to go to lectures. One of those was by the famous New York anarchist Enrico Malatini, a short, stubby, fiery orator. He did things to the crowd, things that made them rise out of themselves and believe what he said and cheer and shout. When after the meeting I was introduced and he looked at me directly, something so violent happened to me that I could say nothing. I wanted nothing in the world but to be close to him, to listen to him, and to make him a part of myself. When Malatini left for Los Angeles 2 days later, Ina and I sat opposite him on the train. That was in June. In Los Angeles, we stayed with friends of his. My life for the next weeks became a dream. Malatini had 4 lectures in Los Angeles. I attended them all. He was a divine figure to me, whatever he was to the others. Every word he uttered seemed to me a miraculous revelation. When he announced that he was going to New Orleans and then to St. Louis and Chicago, I followed him to the train and asked him to kiss me. He did. I felt I had never known before what it was to kiss and be kissed. I told him that I would see him both in New Orleans and in St. Louis. Next day, I asked Ina if she wanted to stay in Los Angeles and get a job, or go with me to New Orleans, and she answered by humming the old tune, "I'll go where you want to go, dear Lord." Although we had talked about hoboing and had known folks who did it all our lives, I thought that I had better know a little something about this particular trip. So we went over to the Hobo College to ask about the best route. Hobo College was then over on the Mexican Plaza, a large room with maps and pamphlets and pictures of Karl Marx and Lenin, Jack London, and J. Eads Howe. Every type of wandering person came in and out of its doors, men and women. This day, when we went over, there were only men there. They were free and generous with their advice. "The SP is the best road to take," one said. "But she's a bitch, sister. Shackles are hostile, and the railroad dicks will glom you sure, unless you're lucky." Another did his best to discourage us. "There are damn few empties on those freights," he told us, "and you'll have to ride the bumpers or deck it. A big woman like you can never ride the rods, and the reefers are all full of ice. You might make it if you're tough, but you're not. You girls will do much better to hitchhike. It will take longer, but it's cleaner and safer. Why don't you do something even better than that? Go to the charities and tell them you're broke and that your mother lives in New Orleans. They'll ship you." But I had thought of my trip in terms of hoboing, and hobo I would. A short, fat man of about 40, who had been on the road for 25 years, came up to us then and offered to help us. "Boys, I was going back east next week," he said, "but if you kids want to go today and need the services of an expert, I'm your guide. I'll show you the ropes. Before we get to New Orleans, I'll make first-class hobos out of you. Now this is going to be a cinch. All you girls got to do is say I'm your father, and keep your traps closed and your legs crossed, and don't ditch me for any shakes." And the eastbound fast freight that left the Southern Pacific yards that night was an empty freight car. Empty, that is, of everything except 14 hobos besides Fat, Ina, and myself. Thank you. Please like and subscribe.